Well, hello, and welcome again to the 2012fad.com. I will be your host for this evening, and my name is Charlie Bluehawk. Last night we talked about a trillion times a second, and it really begins with a variety of facts, quote unquote, that Western scientists have finally been permitted by our masters to talk about with us. They've been finally permitted to talk about things that they've known about privately for probably decades. And the 5 years I spent working at NASA under a Raytheon contract, I saw firsthand that scientists have to be the most closed-minded people on the planet because they have no choice. The people who give them their paychecks tell them what they are allowed to say, what they're allowed to see, and what they're allowed to explore. And the absolutely primitive technology that NASA uses is, I can't even say it's laughable. It's so sad. NASA is nothing but a PR arm of the U.S. military. And for 5 years, I saw it with my own eyes. And it was just for me, it was heartbreaking. It was a tragedy because as a child, I watched the moon landings and I thought, wow, to be in NASA, a scientist must have the most open mind in the world. And of course, no. So anyway, some of the facts that Western scientists have finally been permitted to talk about, and still decades behind and still not very much, they talk about our universe where you and I live exists inside of a bubble. Basically, it's the design of a soap bubble, and it's surrounded by other soap bubbles, probably having universes of their own inside. That inside of this soap bubble, this bubble universe that you and I live in, there are at least 10 dimensions. Western scientists have finally been permitted to say this out loud. Well, ancient Asian cultures, hundreds of thousands of years old, which means they've survived several occurrences of the event, they've known that there are hundreds of thousands, millions of different dimensions existing inside of this bubble universe with you and I. But Western scientists have been permitted to say that there are 10. And these 10 dimensions of you and I chatting exist in the same time, in the same space. But we can't see them because they vibrate at a frequency slightly different than yours and mine. It gets down to the frequency, the vibration of your own atoms. You and I can talk and say hello and say hi, have a cup of coffee, pet the cat, drive the car, because the atoms in all of those things vibrate at the same frequency. Atoms are the exact same design as a solar system. And if you look at a solar system, it's mostly just empty space. So you and I, made up of atoms in our body, we are mostly just empty space. And what keeps us from passing between each other, because we are only mostly empty space, is the magnetic fields that keep those particles of those atoms bound together and bound to each other, the same frequency. Now, Western scientists have also been able to finally admit that at the center of our galaxy, the galaxy where you and I live, the galaxy that is part of millions, maybe billions of other galaxies that all exist in our universe, and the universe that exists inside of a soap bubble, Western scientists have finally been able to tell us that we get a burst of transmission, a burst of information from the center of our galaxy, trillions of times every second. That's a lot of energy. But it makes sense considering that you and I live inside of a gigantic electrical generator. That's what the universe is. It's an electrical generator. But since it's made up of vibrations and made up of waves, there's a lot of information floating around us as well. Everything we say, everything we do, everything that we experience in the past, the present, and the future, all exist in here. It's all here with us. We just have to know that and try to look a little harder. Western scientists have also finally admitted that the Earth, the planet we live on, physically grows. It gets physically bigger over time. Again, because of the bursts of energy it receives from the center of the galaxy. Western scientists have finally been able to tell us the truth about gravity. Gravity is not what we thought it was at all. On our world, on all worlds, Gravity is not below our feet pulling us down. Gravity is above our heads pushing us down towards the center of the planet. And it also explains how our Earth can be hollow. As the Earth continues to grow, it goes from being a solid ball with a molten core to a hollow sphere with the molten core now acting as a sun inside. How is this possible? Well, we get bursts of transmissions of energy, trillions of times a second from the center of our galaxy. That energy, our planet turns into matter, and the matter grows. It adds onto it. The continents drift apart because the planet's physically getting bigger. And because gravity, the center of gravity, is above our heads, not below our feet, it holds the molten core, which is now swinging free, in the exact center of the Earth. And it's not science fiction, it's not fantasy, it's not religion, it's just simple physics, in this case electromagnetics. Western scientists have also been able to finally admit that the DNA in our bodies carries no information at all. None. They're simply antennae. And the 22 pair of chromosomes in our bodies that make us who we are simply antennae that pick up information from somewhere that tells our bodies we're white, we're black, we're red, we're short, we're tall, we're thin, we're fat. The information that we always believed was in the DNA, no, it's not. The DNA, the chromosomes, are simply antennae picking up the information of whether we're tall or short or thin or fat. And where does that information come from? It comes from the center of our galaxy, apparently, 1 trillion times a second. And so, again, this has all been proven by Western scientists, or rather Western scientists have been finally given permission to talk about it, which only puts you and I a few thousand years behind where we should be in technology, in science, in the knowledge of who and what we really are. But the nice thing about this is you can go check this for yourself. You can go to who should be your best friend in the world, your local reference librarian. At the local public library, the local depository library, the local college library, the local university library. Make friends with the reference librarian and say, hey, I heard this story. Can we look it up? Is there any information on this? And they'll probably be thrilled to death to explore these things with you. That's why people become reference librarians. They want to learn. And they're terribly lonely people. I sympathize. But I have to warn you about something. Asking questions becomes habit for me. Because once you learn to ask questions, it only leads to asking even more questions. It's called evolution. And so tonight I thought we might chat about war for the sake of war. And here we are, the United States of America Incorporated, no longer a constitutional republic. We are now a privately owned offshore corporation. And this is something that you, again, can look up yourself. Go online, go to Dun & Bradstreet, and do a keyword search on United States of America Incorporated. Do a keyword search on U.S. Department of Justice, U.S. Federal Reserve Bank, the Internal Revenue Service. Do a keyword search on your local police department, your local courthouse, your local prison. And you will find them listed on Dun & Bradstreet as privately owned offshore corporations. We are no longer a constitutional republic. We are a business. So war for the sake of war. Why are we at war, this privately owned offshore corporation called USA Inc.? Why are we at war all the time, constantly? Why is it that Obama, the great peacemaker, a man that none of us had ever heard of before, a man who won the Nobel Peace Prize before we ever knew who he was or he had done anything, why is it now that Obama, the finger puppet, frankly, the slack-jawed, mouth-breathing idiot who works in the mailroom at the corporation known as Hate Inc., and whose only job it is to deliver the messages of his masters, senior management, at Hate Incorporated. He has us in more wars than either of the George Bushes ever did. The man of peace. So war for the sake of war. Why? Right now, CIA armed drones are killing people all over the world, claiming that they are Al-Qaeda. Well, you know, the interesting thing about Al-Qaeda many years ago was actually a name of a folder of a project of the CIA. The CIA created something called Al-Qaeda. And Al-Qaeda originally was in Afghanistan to fight the Russians. They were the finger puppets of the CIA. And the interesting thing about any wars ever fought in Afghanistan is that no one's ever won a war there. Afghanistan is one of those places you never go and think you're going to win, because you won't, because the Afghan people are amazingly tough. The terrain is amazingly ugly, and a modern mechanized force doesn't stand a chance in hell of winning against some really, really tough people, mountain people, who are smarter than you when it comes to killing. So CIA created Al-Qaeda. Well, that's nice. CIA did business with a guy by the name of Osama bin Laden. Now that's interesting because the Bush family, one of the old George Bush, little George Bush, Barbara Bush, the Bushes, they're in business all over the world. They're in the oil business. They're also in the construction business. Now the interesting thing about this is Osama bin Laden comes from a very wealthy family in the Middle East. They're billionaires. And you know what they do to make their money? They're in construction all over the world. You know where they're in business with in Mexico? In the construction business. Guess who their business partner in Mexico is? The Bush family. So the Bush family and Osama bin Laden and his family are in the construction business together in Mexico called El Bushco. Isn't that interesting? So anyway, Osama bin Laden, we're told, is this horrible, horrible fellow who's in charge of Al-Qaeda. Well, over the years, I've talked to lots of people from the Middle East. And when you talk about Al-Qaeda to people from the Middle East, they go, oh, those idiots? They're a bunch of morons. They're stupid. They're running around the desert. They're playing at being great warriors. But frankly, they're too stupid to accomplish anything. You say the word Al-Qaeda in the Middle East, people just laugh. Al-Qaeda are nothing. Well, this rings very true with me because I grew up with CIA agents, quote unquote, who were really just assets. U.S. Army Air Corps intelligence bullies, street thugs, scum of the earth, trash of the world, which is, of course, the very heart and soul of the CIA. And I grew up with these guys in the United States. And these guys were so pompous, so arrogant, so full of themselves, and yet were absolutely useless to the world. But they thought of themselves as great men, great powers. And so I could easily see the CIA going in and finding another bunch of slack-jawed, mouth-breathing idiots, giving them some guns and saying, hey, you're now Al-Qaeda. Oh, yes, we're great warriors. No, they're a bunch of idiots. So what good are they, Al-Qaeda, if they're too stupid to do anything? Well, you always need, in a con game, you always need a patsy. You always need to set somebody up to take the blame. And the more stupid they are, the more clueless they are, the more arrogant they are, the better. When the CIA on 9/11 blew up the World Trade Center, they used very, very advanced technology, and they used a lot of really, really bad actors. So who are they going to blame for this stunt that they pulled, which terrified the cattle, you and me, into allowing the Patriot Act to be passed through, which is, of course, well, how do you say this, dictatorship, fascism, all the things we used to point at Russia and say, oh, that's bad. Well, Russia's been free for 30 years now and been keeping the peace around the world for the last 3 decades, whereas the United States, Great Britain, and Israel have been descending into dictatorships, madness. But who did the CIA, when they blew up the World Trade Center in New York on September 11th, 2001, who did they point the finger at? Because it's a con. And in a con, you need a patsy. You need some moron, some pompous jackass who thinks they're really, really important. You need to be able to blame them for that. That's what Al-Qaeda was created for. They're a group of morons. My friends in the Middle East tell me that Al-Qaeda are so stupid they couldn't fight their way out of a paper bag. And so now we have another reason for Homeland Security, for the Patriot Act, for armed military troops in the United States, for turning the United States of America, a constitutional republic, our country, into a privately owned offshore corporation called the United States of America Incorporated. Because we're supposed to be afraid of something called Al-Qaeda, which according to people in the Middle East who know Al-Qaeda are a bunch of morons. They couldn't find their own heads with both hands. Our friends, the CIA, the clowns of peace, continue to commit murder all over the world. So, of course, they need to continually have a fall guy to blame it on. Now, we hear in the mainstream news media, the mouthpieces of our masters, that for some reason the CIA cannot hunt down and find their own creations. The CIA cannot find Al-Qaeda. They never did find Osama bin Laden. It might be for the fact that he's been dead for 10 years. And he was a diabetic, I think, and he died years ago. In fact, there were reports on this in the mainstream press. Oh yeah, Osama bin Laden, he's been dead for 10 years now. All of a sudden, they found him and they killed him. Wow, that must have been a good trick. You see, I understand this because I grew up with another set of great warriors, great heroes, CIA assets, street thugs, bullies, liars. So now I'm beginning to understand the value of Al-Qaeda. You need somebody to blame. You need someone to blame and point fingers at. Because the guys I grew up with, especially the two, they were U.S. Army Air Corps intelligence idiots who were part of this gang of petty street thugs that the CIA was running. And to say that they were stupid, honest to God, does not even begin to describe these two guys. And even me, I was a beaten animal. I was a whipped dog. I was a frightened, terrified child. And I was just being used as part of their front, their cover story. As part of their show that they were putting on for the neighbors, trying to convince the neighbors that they were normal American families. Even as terrified and beaten and broken as I was, even I could see that these two clowns were stupid. These were guys in their 60s, 70s. They knew nothing about anything. They knew nothing about business. They knew nothing about anything real. But whoever they were working for had puffed up their massive egos to convince them that they were great men, and then proceeded to use these two clowns for all sorts of bizarre things. For example, these two idiots, and they're like zero knowledge of business. I'm a small child and I knew more about business than these two guys did. They would routinely, year after year, lose millions of dollars. And they did this on a regular basis. And the money would be just, from all appearances, just stolen from them in the most obvious ways possible, that even if I could see it, my God, it must have been amazingly obvious to, quote-unquote, anybody who had a brain. And yet, after a few days of being completely broke, completely destroyed, robbed of everything they had, and they're sitting there puzzling to each other how such a pair of great men, great warriors, such heroes, how this could have happened to them. A few days later, they had millions of dollars in their pockets again. And they would do the same thing over and over and over again. And they never asked why. I couldn't understand it then. But now I realize they were being used to launder drug money for big corporations by government agencies, making payments to operatives. Now I understand it, but then it just didn't make any sense. It also explained why these two true idiots, true morons, truly stupid old guys, personally knew U.S. presidents. These two guys knew Dwight David Eisenhower on sight. They were personally in charge of operating a huge airport in Southern California that had been abandoned after World War II. But now I understand that. Looking back, that very, very long runway, like 14,000-foot runway, was being used to move drugs, move whatever they were moving back in the 50s. They knew Dwight David Eisenhower, President of the United States. They knew the man in person. They knew any number of famous, powerful American millionaires, and they knew lots of very famous entertainers. How these two slack-jawed, mouth-breathing idiots did this? They were working for somebody. I mean, at one point in time, and I was there, I saw all of this, they sold one of their famous Las Vegas megastar pals, a young girl, to be his mistress, his live-in lover. She was 15 at the time. Now, they had to do this because they had previously sold the same young girl to one of their drug lord buddies, a big-time drug dealer. But he was really big into drugs himself. I mean, he was basically, a cockroach. And he was just so foul and so disgusting, the girl actually objected. And since her own mother, another drug addict, was in on all of these deals and wanted to make money off of selling her own daughter, they had to find another buyer. But luckily for this young girl, who was such a sweet little thing, she was sold to this very big-time Las Vegas entertainer. And apparently, thankfully, he was really good to her and treated her really well. I mean, she met, Donald Trump had her personal cell phone number, would call her to say hi every once in a while. He actually called her one day when I was with her, me, the beaten dog, the animal. And she got a call on her cell phone from Donald Trump. He was just checking in to say hi to her. I saw these things with my own eyes. But eventually, her father, who she never knew in her lifetime because her mother was this drug addict and was just foul, eventually her father died, and he was very wealthy, and he left her all of his money. So her life turned out to be really, really well, as far as I know. And luckily, she had spent enough time with very rich, very powerful, very wealthy people. I'm hoping against hope. And the last I heard, this was many years ago, she knew how to handle her own money, and she knew not to trust her drug addict mother with any of it. So luckily for her, her life turned out well, and I'm very happy about that. Most of our lives don't turn out that well when we're victimized by these creatures. But the thing about these two idiots, these two morons, these two U.S. Army Air Corps intelligence, street thugs, cowards, bullies, child rapists, extortionists, they never once spent a day in jail. Never once were they accused by anyone, except me, of course, but since I was a whipped dog, a beaten animal, I was considered an ungrateful orphan child. And whenever I tried as a small child to tell people what was really going on, they were horrified. The boys? They're great guys. How ungrateful you must be. So nobody listened. And I know a lot of small children, boys and girls, who were raped by the older brother, and the younger brother helped cover it up. They never got any justice in their lives. And so now, war for the sake of war, our masters have created something that they call the Joint Special Operations Command, JSOC. They love acronyms for things. Now, it was JSOC, Joint Special Operations Command, that supposedly just the other day, and it's September 2011, just the other day, an elite force of the Joint Special Operations Command, JSOC, supposedly killed Osama bin Laden in Pakistan in May 2011, which is interesting because Osama bin Laden at that point had been dead for 10 years, according to Washington, D.C. Government people. You can look this up on the internet. Oh yeah, Osama's been dead for 10 years. Well, apparently, Barack Obama, the great man of peace, sent assassins, and that's what JSOC is, assassins, to Pakistan to kill Osama bin Laden, even though he's been dead for 10 years. Now, what happened to the assassins as they were being flown back from Pakistan? They were killed. That's the first law of assassination. You kill the killers. If there are no witnesses, and there are no witnesses of the witnesses, it never happened. Now, who was it that assassinated the assassins? And that's what JSOC is. They're U.S., United States of America Incorporated, paid assassins. You and I are in the assassination business because this is done in our names. You and I are personally responsible for this. So who killed the assassins who assassinated Osama bin Laden, who's been dead for 10 years by that time? It was probably the CIA. So now, why the reason for creating yet another U.S. military assassination team? And I love this. The reason that we need yet another U.S. government assassination squad is because the CIA cannot find their own agents, Al-Qaeda, the agents that they created, the front men who take the blame for everything the CIA does, front men who are too stupid to find their own heads with both hands. Well, apparently the reason that the Joint Special Operations Command was created is because the CIA is too small. The CIA doesn't have the resources to commit murder worldwide. Well, yes, actually they do. The CIA continues to commit murder all over the world. The U.S. government blames Al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda, who are too stupid for words, running around in the desert pretending to be great warriors. But supposedly this thing called JSOC can find them and murders them. These hapless, hopeless, useless little guys. Why? To cover up the CIA murdering innocent people all over the world. And the Joint Special Operations Command, JSOC, they don't happen to notice that the people they're assassinating are morons? Incapable of blowing anything up. I mean, they can't do anything. I mean, we're talking about the Delta Force. Now, whenever you hear the word Delta used in U.S. military, these are meat robots. These are mind-controlled. It's a long story, but whenever you hear the word Delta in U.S. Army military parlance, these are meat robots. These are killing machines. That's all they do is kill. That's it. So JSOC has the Army's Delta Force. They've got Navy SEALs. They've got Air Force Special Tactics Squadron. They've got the Army's Special Operations Aviation Regiment. And they've got a Ranger Regiment. And they think that the CIA is too small to do what they do. Well, I hate to tell them this, but the CIA has its own army. The CIA has its own Navy. The CIA has over 2,500 front companies the last time I checked, including U-Haul and their competition. I can never remember. But they've got all of these front companies, and the CIA has been pretty much wholly funded since old George Bush arranged the drug trafficking routes from Asia to the United States. And what funds the major 1,000 U.S. corporations funds the CIA. Now, the CIA has its own army. It has its own navy. It has its own military bases all over the world. And since they buy from the same suppliers that the U.S. government buys from, they look like real U.S. military installations. So how is it the CIA can be too small that they need JSOC to come in and save them? And JSOC, the Joint Special Operations Command, only has a 50-50 success rate, which is not good when you're blowing up innocent people, when you're assassinating people all over the world. That's pretty dim. But on September 16, 2003, Donald Rumsfeld, another mass murderer, he signed an executive order making this thing, JSOC, the Center of Counterterrorism Operations for the corporation known as USA Incorporated, a wholly owned subsidiary of Hate Incorporated. So somehow we have been convinced that the CIA is too small and too ineffectual to do its job. So yet we need another team of assassins murdering innocent people at a 50-50 success rate around the world in our names. Now this is interesting. While another wholly criminal organization called the FBI, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, they've actually come to the conclusion, the FBI, that Al-Qaeda is of no threat to the United States at all. The FBI has decided this. Apparently these guys don't talk to each other. So what does the FBI do so they can keep their power? They hire informants, more con men, to stir up trouble in the United States. What they do is they go and they troll for losers in the Muslim communities. And the Muslims have the same problems that the Christians have, that the Buddhists have. 98% of their people are losers, cattle. So the CIA pays con men like $100,000 per, operation, episode, whatever you call it, to go find Muslim losers, convince them that they are great warriors, come up with terrorist plots for them to follow through on, give them money and weapons and bombs, and then set up these poor schmucks while they're being caught committing acts of terrorism that the FBI put together. That's how the FBI is keeping its hold of power. They come up with a problem, they create a problem, and then they come up with a solution. And the solution is giving up our rights. And this keeps our masters and their servants, the Mandarin class, in power. Not too long ago, getting back to Afghanistan, we were pals with Afghanistan because we were helping them against the Russians. Well, old George Bush, when he was president, wanted pipelines, oil pipelines from the Caspian Sea to go through Afghanistan, and they wanted to own the pipelines. They invited their pals, the Taliban, who are real fighters, real warriors, to Washington, D.C. to chat about it. And Halliburton, Dick Cheney's company, was going to build the pipelines. Oh, by the way, the Western countries wanted poppy production to increase because they made all of their money on oil and from poppies, which you turn into heroin. The Taliban said no. The Taliban said anything running through our country we will own, and we will cut back on the production of poppies. The next thing we know, the United States of America has invaded Afghanistan. Isn't that interesting? The oil pipeline from the Caspian Sea through Afghanistan, Iraq, Iran. All you have to do is pull out a map and look at it, and you can see why, if the United States and Britain and Israel control those countries, they can run pipelines through them from the Caspian Sea and deliver oil to their clients. Now, what does that mean for the local citizens of those countries? It means poverty. And it means ecological mass suicide. But that's okay. Our masters pocket all the money. The next step, apparently, for JSOC is Mexico. The Mexican government has a constitution that says you can't have foreign police or foreign military in their country. And yet, since Washington, D.C. has already provided the drug lords, the drug cartels, with guns to fight against the Mexican government, the United States of America is now sending military advisors to Mexico to help them deal with the problem that the United States created in the first place. And again, you can find this in mainstream media, where reporters not that long ago discovered that the CIA was supplying Mexican drug cartels with guns, lots of guns. And since they created the problem, they now have come up with a solution. Oh, we'll come down and help you deal with the drug cartels that we armed, and you'll give us rights to exist in your country, to rape your citizens, to rob and cheat and steal from them, and we'll also take over your country. Nobody seems to notice any of this. So I have an idea for JSOC. If you really want to be great American heroes, if you really want to be who you think you are, then take our country back from our masters and give it back to the American people. And the way you do this Stop spying on the rest of the world. Spy on the CIA. Oh, by the way, it's in Langley, Virginia, in case you couldn't figure it out. If you really want to stop Al-Qaeda, stop it at its source. Langley, Virginia. It's called the Central Intelligence Agency. Train all of your high-tech spying apparatus on CIA headquarters. Then you really will be American heroes. May you live as long as you wish. May you love as long as you live. For the 2012fad.com, this is Charlie Bluehawk. The 2012 Fad is brought to you by Coffee and Blood, Love Letters Between the Dead, a series of 5 erotica horror novels about a fallen angel finding his way back to regain his own soul, and how the CIA war against the human race, their black magic, captures and traps him in the body of a mind-controlled slave designed to hunt down and to kill their god, their Satan.